All right, so we talked earlier about how John Wesley got his ideas from his mother, Susanna Wesley. And so I wanted to go a little bit more into that, where Wesley's ideas about the getting people together in small groups and talking about what it means to be saved and what it means to be a Christian, to have Christ change your heart, that basically came from his mother. Susanna Wesley, from the time that John was very little, knew that he was going to grow up to do something very special. She knew that God had preserved his life so that he could go out and do something great with it. When he was about 5 or 6, John Wesley's house, the Wesley's house, burnt down. It was the parsonage for the parish in England, where his father was a preacher. And so his father, Samuel Wesley, and his mother, Susanna, they got the children out of the house, but John Wesley was still asleep. He's just this little kid, little 5 or 6 year old, and he's still asleep. And once the mother realized this, well, Samuel Wesley, his father, was about to run in the house to try to get him out, but the stairs were on fire. He didn't think it would hold his weight. They actually thought their son was going to just burn to death. But little John Wesley, he climbed up on the dresser next to the window and started yelling out the window. So they got a couple of guys to come over, and one standing on the other's shoulders. They were able to get up to the window because they didn't have time even to get a ladder, grabbed John, pulled him out of the window, and the roof right after that collapsed right where it had been. So Susanna, his mother, knew that he was saved for a purpose, and she wanted to teach her children the gospel. She wanted her children to grow up in Christ. And so she did everything she could to teach them and to train them up, and so that they could be saved. Well, her husband, Samuel, went away to London for a time, and there was kind of I guess you call him a substitute preacher that was preaching sermons, and Susanna didn't think he was doing a very good job. So she went and found some old sermons and started teaching her children from that in her own kitchen. And there was a servant there who was listening and said, "Oh wow, this is really good stuff." And that servant invited their parents to come, and then pretty soon you had a whole room full of people, and pretty soon there were so many people she couldn't even keep holding the meetings in her house. So of course the substitute preacher got a little jealous of this and wrote to the father, Samuel Wesley, who was in London, and Samuel wrote to his wife and asked her to stop. He said it was his desire that she stop these meetings, and that she let the substitute preacher actually preach the sermons. And she wrote back to him, and she said basically, I'm not quoting exactly, but she said basically, if you want to take upon yourself the responsibility, then you give me don't just tell me you would like me to do this, you give me your positive command that I should stop, and that way when we are before the bar of the great Jehovah, I will be clean of this, allowing my children to grow up without teaching them properly. And so after that, Samuel wrote back to her and said, okay, you can keep doing it. So Susanna kept teaching her children, and it was her tenacity that really taught John what it meant to take the gospel to the people, and her just absolute desire to have her children raised in the gospel, raised to faith in Christ. And she wasn't going to let anybody else get in the way of that, including the substitute preacher. And so that's really where this idea of Methodism comes from, and the ideas that Wesley had about taking the gospel to the people was this gathering that came about just in Susanna's own kitchen. So I thought that was a really cool story to show how Wesley was trained and how God prepared him through his mother. He raised up a mother who had the desires in her heart to make sure that her children got taught, and then John Wesley took that message to all the world. Came here to the United States, to Savannah, Georgia, and then from here, started that close association of a few people gathered together, talking about the gospel, talking about what it means to be saved, talking about what the grace of Christ does to change our hearts. And from there, it just mushroomed. George Whitefield went out, preached all up and down the Atlantic seaboard, and the Great Awakening swept through the entire colonies, the entire English colonies.